Hi guys, and welcome to my August wrap-up. I've read 9 books in the month of August, 1 manga and 1 little fairy tale book. First off, I want to include in this video my BOOKTUBE-A-THON wrap-up because when the BOOKTUBE-A-THON ended, I was going on a vacation, so I couldn't really make a BOOKTUBE-A-THON wrap-up, and when I came home again, it kind of didn't make any sense for me anymore to make one. So I decided to include this in my August wrap-up because I will show you the books anyway, so I can also tell you for which challenge I used the book and how I felt throughout the BOOKTUBE-A-THON. So let's get started. The first book I read for the BOOKTUBE-A-THON was Crown of Midnight by Sarah J Maas, and this is the second book in the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. And I chose this book for 3 challenges originally, but throughout the BOOKTUBE-A-THON I changed my mind a bit because I changed the books I wanted to read, and so this only counts for 2 challenges, namely the second challenge with read a book by an author with the same first letter of your last name, and like I said, my last name starts with an M, Sarah J Maas, M. Wonderful. And the other challenge I used this book for was the 6th challenge, and that was read a book you really want to read, and I really wanted to read it, so I did. I was 50 pages in when BOOKTUBE-A-THON started, but I managed to get through this book quite fast, I believe, because the first few days I read 50 pages a day, and in the last days I read 70 to 120, I guess, because I really wanted to know how it ended and on the last day and wanted to kind of get through it, so I stayed up and finished this book. And I really enjoyed this book, but kind of spoiled myself a bit for this one in particular, so I didn't enjoy it as much, and because I read The Assassin's Blade before this, I was on Team Sam still and couldn't really enjoy this lot of things that were happening in this book, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. But don't be judged by that, because there were plot twists where twice the author managed to shock me twice, where I was like, what? I didn't even see that coming. And it's still a really good series, I just was an idiot and spoiled myself. Then I wanted to read The Iron Daughter by Julie Kagawa, which was the book for the challenge with the blue on the cover, or the blue cover, and I started to read it, got about 50 pages in, and didn't enjoy it at all. I really was annoyed by Megan so much that I couldn't read this book and was like, I will never manage to read this book in the last 3 days of BOOKTUBE-A-THON, so I put it aside, decided I don't want to read it anymore because it was just, sorry, it was not my thing anymore, and Megan was behaving like a little child and not like a young woman, and it really annoyed me, and so I stopped reading this, and I had to choose another blue book, and for that I chose Vampire Academy by Richelle Mead. You may ask yourself, Sabrina, this is red, this is not blue. But I didn't have this copy with me when I read it for BOOKTUBE-A-THON. I read the ebook, the German version of the ebook, and this cover is blue. I will link it down below for you with the English version, and you will see it is blue, so I know I kind of cheated on that one, but my blue book. And then I also chose it for the challenge of read the book you acquired last, because I didn't have this physical copy with me then, but it was the book I last bought online. So technically the last book I bought, last book I got, so yeah. And I have to say I really enjoyed Vampire Academy. I've watched the movie quite some time ago. I watched the movie when it came out and wanted to read this book series for quite a while, but never really got around to it, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised with it. It was quite different from the movie, but I still enjoyed it. But I think everyone was right with that the first book is kind of the weakest, and because of that I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, because it was a good book, a really good book, but not the best book, and I wanted to leave some space for the other books in the series to come. Then I kind of cheated again on the BOOKTUBE-A-THON and chose The Unforgotten Song of the Witch by Arina Tanemura, and this is the little fairy tale book that is included in the Shinjuju Macross manga series by Arina Tanemura, and was a little gift in the 10th volume of the manga. And I knew I could get through this in one sitting, so I read it for the challenge with read a book in just one sitting without letting go of it, and I read it in like 5 minutes. So yeah, read this, enjoyed this the second time I read it. And the last thing I read for BOOKTUBE-A-THON was the manga Squib Feeling Blue, also by Arina Tanemura. This manga has 4 short stories by Arina Tanemura in it, and I wanted to have another thing to add on to my wrap-up for BOOKTUBE-A-THON, so I read it and I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed the stories. I kind of like the first and the second the best, I think, but they were all really good. So that was what I read for BOOKTUBE-A-THON, and I was really happy with what I read, because like I said in my TBR, I would have been happy if I read 1 book, but I read 2 books and a manga and the little fairy tale book, and so I read quite a lot for BOOKTUBE-A-THON. The next book I read was Frostbite by Rochelle Mead. This is the second book in the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead, and I have to say I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it more than the first one. The end was just so good. I liked how the story developed, I liked how Rose developed. I really enjoyed this and gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And like I mentioned, the end of the second book was just so good that I had to read the third book in the Vampire Academy series, Shadow Kiss, right after. And I have to say it was probably really dumb of me, because I kind of was overfilled with Vampire Academy and it was starting to get a bit too much for me, but I still wanted to read this book and wanted to get through it, and I got through it really fast. That's not the point, but I guess it would have been better if I've read another book back then, and yeah, that's why probably I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I managed to spoil myself again. Like with the second book of Vampire Academy, I'm pretty good at spoiling myself, I guess, and it was a bit too long for me and I wasn't so much of a fan of the end, but there were really great scenes in this book as well. The next book I read is The Walk by Richard Paul Evans, and this is the first book in the Walk series, which consists of 5 books, and I read this book so fast. I read it in something like a little bit more than 12 hours, and I really enjoyed this book, but I didn't give it a rating because it was one of these kind of special, unique books that I don't give a rating to. You had some of those in the past. I really enjoyed how the story developed, and I really enjoyed that we see the bad part at the beginning of the book. And because I enjoyed this book so much, I read the second book, Miles to Go, right after, and I read it in like 2 days and also really enjoyed it. Also didn't give it a rating to. And I also read the third book in the series and the last one that is out in German, and that is Miles to Go, also by Richard Paul Evans, and also really enjoyed this one. And I really like the journey that Alan makes in these books and the people he gets to know, and it's really a refreshing and interesting story. And then I read In Sissy's Garden, which contains the poems written by the Empress of Austria and Queen of Hungary, Elizabeth. And I'm a big fan of Elizabeth and saw those poems and read one and actually enjoyed it, because I'm not really into poems that much, but really enjoyed this book. It was really interesting. It's made so beautifully. You have a lot of pictures in it and beautiful fonts, and it's just a beautiful book, and the poems are really interesting, and I really enjoyed this book. The next book I read was Every 100 Years by C. Cohen, and I got this book from the author and I really wanted to read this, and I did, but I wasn't really a fan of this book. I liked the first half of the story really a lot. There were quite some language mistakes in the book that I could get over. In the first half of the book it was okay. I was like, okay, it's not the best German, but I can get over it. I enjoy the story so far. But in the second half there came quite some logic mistakes in, and first I was kind of confused, but then I didn't enjoy the story anymore because of it, and it kind of got ridiculous because of the many logic mistakes, the many mistakes that were in the story. It was like things were happened twice, certain things were first in LA, then they were at the border of America, and so on and so on. And also the sex scenes kind of got ridiculous because they were really repetitive, and it was just always like the heavy stuff, and it wasn't just written too well. It wasn't really good. You were reading the sex scenes and we're like, yeah, okay, they're having sex now. And because all of it added together, and I just couldn't ignore the language and the mistakes in the story. These illogical mistakes, I had to give it a 1-star rating. I really didn't enjoy it. I thought it was getting really boring, and I didn't care for the characters anymore because of how the story developed and how the writing style and all developed. So it was just a total pass for me. And the last book I read I don't have with me anymore because it was part of a group where you read the book and send it to the next person, read the book, send it to the next person, and just write in the book that you've read it and how you liked it, and then it gets back to the author and I already sent it to the next person, and that is Behind the Scenes, the first book in the Behind the Scenes duology, I think, by C. Cohen. And I had hopes that I would enjoy this more than Every 100 Years, but it kind of wasn't. The language was way better, the start of the story was again really interesting, but then I kind of wasn't a fan anymore. There weren't any too big mistakes in the story like in Every 100 Years, but there were also quite some mistakes regarding making the movie, and you know, there were things you know weren't realistic. And especially like this thing that they shot the last scene of the movie and like 5 days later the premiere of the movie was. That was just not realistic at all. And I didn't really enjoy the male protagonist, and I didn't really enjoy the female protagonist too much and their interaction with each other. And I'm sorry, it kind of reminded me of 50 Shades of Grey. Although I haven't really read 50 Shades of Grey, I read like 100 pages. It kind of reminded me a lot of 50 Shades of Grey, and not in a good way. And it was just, I didn't like how the story developed. I didn't like the character development at all. I just didn't like it. It was just not a good book. And like the other book, it was just slightly better, but still it's a total pass for me. And I also gave it a 1 out of 5 stars. Those were the worst books I've read in 2015, sadly. So that was it for my August wrap up. I'm pretty happy with the amount of books I read, and I'm also pretty happy with what books I read, except for the last 2, but still quite happy with my reading month. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you soon with another video, guys. Goodbye!